Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to have you on the August 6th edition of DAACAT. Myself, Jim McDermott. Morning.
Dustin Renner. Good morning, everyone.
And Nora will not be joining us. She is on maternity leave, so um, she'll be coming back here shortly, I believe, by next week. But glad to have you. Another rainy morning. Imagine that. Drought's finally over, Dustin, huh?
And that's right. I think we're starting on maybe having the wettest August on record.
Yeah. I definitely accomplished that July. Now working on August. Well, we'll keep things open for people that want to ask questions in the chat or come off mute. But as far as our overall agenda, as usual, we'll start with a trivia question. Cover GDUs to kick us off, talk a little bit about the weather and some of the moisture we've been having. Also, quite a few areas received a little bit of wind, a little breezy a week ago Monday. Diseases, of course, that's always a topic this time of the year, both corn and soybeans, and also corn pollination. Then quite a bit of talk about that. And then we'll finish up with a spotlight product and then also a few comments on dicamba and the recent label that's come out from the EPA and maybe some comments around that, and also comments that you can submit to the EPA to help that whole process. So, trivia question. I don't know about you, Dustin, but one of the more common questions I've been getting is on SDS.
Sudden death.
Yeah, sudden death syndrome. So, this one's around varieties. So, in the Asgrow Extend Flex lineup, what are some of the better varieties on sudden death? As everyone knows, one of the management tactics is variety selection when it comes to sudden death. So
there's a few right answers here.
Yes, there's more than one. So feel free to be liberal with this one. Quite a few to choose from, actually. But looking for some of the best options on sudden death syndrome in the Asgrow Extend Flex lineup. One of the ones that's the top of my list, that's for sure, 19 XF3s. So, Jeff, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's trivia contest. So, definitely a number of them to choose from. And I'll have a slide with a little more detail on variety selection, but a couple of them that are rated especially good. I actually rated a 19 XF3s and 21 XFOs, but there's a handful of other ones that are rated 4 as well. All right, let's jump in and go right to our GDU count. So still running ahead. I picked Calhoun County as the location of choice or county of choice this time. Every planting date from the 11th to the 3rd of May, sitting 100 or more above long-term average. This has, of course, been bouncing back and forth. We've been a little bit higher than this. For the most part, we've actually lost a little ground as far as number of GDUs ahead of the long-term average, which is a good thing this time of the year. If we can extend that ear fill, if we can extend that pod fill, that's going to be a good thing for us. Obviously we've gone through some tremendous heat, especially about 10 days ago, but we've had some nice conditions here, especially right after pollination and during milk and early dough stages. So hopefully that part can continue to be able to give us a long ear fill and keep stress off that corn. Knowing that we've got plenty of moisture, we can stand a little bit more heat, but still those nighttime temperatures will hurt us and cut into yield, cut into those sugars being transported to the kernel, even if we have plenty of moisture. Most areas depend on maturity, of course, and planting date, still on track for a fairly early black layer between the 10th and 15th. The 10th, would be the earliest I would think we'd be at black layer and really continue along the track that we are, more towards the middle of September, or slightly after that. And that would be considering those earlier planting dates, the 11th and 14th. GDU accumulation is about 21 a day. So, putting it in perspective, based on those GDUs that were ahead of the long-term average, we're running about 5 to 6 days ahead if you're looking at it in days. So that's a key factor, especially when it comes to what we're going to talk about here in a bit, diseases. It's going to be a race to the finish, isn't it, Dustin?
Yes, that's for sure. But like you said, ideal conditions post-pollination, if we can get those long, cool grain fill periods, usually is, conducive to above trend line yield. So that's been great for the corn crop and beans.
You bet. So jumping into those current topics, of course, the lodging and green snap that occurred most areas a week ago Monday night. Some areas have had multiple green snap events, as well as some lodging. So it's been a challenge to deal with. Just like we were talking before we got the call started, when we've got 90-mile-an-hour winds, I expected worse last Monday night as I'm in my basement thinking, oh shoot, how's the corn going to look? And essentially the trees took it worse than the corn. It was kind of the overall assessment, but still plenty of leaning. This picture on the left was taken 2 days after, so obviously some lodging, leaning. I have seen some fields that have straightened up slightly, but obviously going to have that gooseneck when we get to harvest. Picture on the right actually is not from this year. This is from Aaron Singling, extension agent with Iowa State down in southwest Iowa. But I wanted to bring this in because that's a question I've been getting a lot. Of the green snap that occurred, a fair amount of it did happen above the ear. And, the question is, well, we've still got the ear intact. In a lot of cases it's pollinated, but what happens from there? Of course, knowing that we've got a lot of that photosynthetic capacity, the upper leaves, 70% of it is needed to fill that ear. So, that part of the factory is gone. Even if we've got kind of an open canopy, history would suggest that we're not going to have much of a ear development there. You can see that little nubbin. So not real hopeful on those cases. Fortunately, most of the green snap I've seen has been pretty limited. It's out there, and there's probably some fields that are much worse than what we think, especially looking at it from the road going by at 55 miles an hour. But I've been in a number of fields where it's sitting there around 5 to 10%. Certainly pockets that are worse. But fortunately, the stage of the crop was at a point where it wasn't as susceptible as it would have been 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I would agree, Jim. I was pretty scared that night for 92-mile-an-hour winds, how this corn was going to take it. And, in my area, at least east of 71, yes, there's some around, but we kind of dodged a bullet a little bit. But there's been several green snap events throughout the summer that, happened earlier as well. But we got a little lucky, I think.
Yeah, you bet. And then, looking at data, it's fairly limited, it's somewhat older data, but I think still applies. I think it's interesting just as you look at, the different timings and yield loss. Certainly, certain times of the year, the ratio is almost 1-to-1. If we've got 25% snap, we can see 25% yield loss. But this blue line down here really would be the one that would be, I would say, closest to what we were experiencing, where we've got, a lot of cases say 10% yield loss. That's equating to, pick your number in there, maybe 3%, 3 to 4% actual yield loss. So, we can definitely know that there's some of the top end taken off in these fields that were hit hard with the wind, but I think we're still going to be able to develop a very good ear where there's lodging and still have a chance for a little bit of compensation, a little bit of ear flex where there's been some green snap. So about that weather, Dustin.
Yeah, for sure. So here's some nice graphs to look at just to put this into perspective. And obviously we've all lived it, but this kind of gets a nice visual. So this is percentage of average precipitation for the month of July. And you can look at that, we're 200 to 300% of our average rainfall this past month. And then really you look at Northeast Iowa and Southwest Iowa, they kind of lucked out a little bit, but when you really look down at it, it's still 100% of their average precip. So we all lived it, but it just a visual to see that, yeah, it really was that wet. And sorry, Jim. And then here's another one as well. So this is looking at the rankings. The Mesonet has a lot of good data in here to look at. And this is the rankings of the last 133 years, historical weather patterns. And this one is for precipitation ranks. And they break Iowa into districts. So there's 9 different districts. And you can see there that North Central takes the prize as the #1 wettest year on record in 133 years. But really the whole state, we're in the top 7, besides that southwest quadrant and south central Iowa, all rank in the top 7 of the wettest years in 133 years. So that is obviously, there's some good things with it, but there are definitely some areas that are starting to go backwards. That who would have thought we would asking the rain to stop in the month of July. I can't really ever remember a time that we start to think that maybe the rain could shut off. Usually we welcome July rains, but it has been a little bit too much in some spots for sure, and brought on some disease pressure earlier than in years past.
Yeah, absolutely. This has a familiar ring to it because last year at this time we were looking at records. Most of that was more May and especially June, obviously much more detrimental to our planting and drowned outs. But here we are again, setting records. But yeah, I'll take still this year over last year.
Yes, for sure. We are sitting much better than we were a year ago here today. But yeah.
Well, like we mentioned, sudden death syndrome is definitely one of the factors that has reared its ugly head with more wetter weather. Kind of that perfect storm, a lot of early planted beans, which is great for yield. But anytime we have early planted beans, especially you think about the earlier planted beans, sat there for several weeks. Some of them took 3+ weeks to emerge. A lot of those fields too, once they emerged, they still didn't take off and grow. And that's the time usually that fusarium fungus is coming in and infecting that plant. Doesn't express it till later season, and really it has to have that either the wet weather or compaction or just nematode or some other stress to induce the toxin to show up in the upper part of the canopy. But certainly some examples here of what we're seeing, starting to see fairly widespread in places. Obviously, management includes things we can do to help out our drainage, reduce compaction. Of course, variety selection, Levo and Saltro can help. I've seen situations where they're able to allow that variety maybe to improve by 1 rating, but just like with most diseases, variety selection and seed treatments alone are not going to eliminate it. It's just a matter of hopefully reducing the spread or the amount of the field that's going to show up as SDS, or in some cases, the ability to still yield through some of that disease that's showing.
Yeah, that's been the call this week, is a lot of SDS showing up, and as this slide shows, it can be misdiagnosed. I think there's some SDS areas, me and you were talking yesterday, Jim, that there's some areas that are just sitting in too much waterlogged soils that are starting to kind of go backwards. But, when you really get out there and you look at sudden death syndrome versus brown stem rot, the above ground symptoms are, basically the same. You're going to get that interveinal chlorosis. Really, the way you're going to tell these two diseases apart is splitting the stems. And the SDS, if it's SDS, the stem's going to be white, where in your brown stem rot, obviously it's going to have a brown stem, hence the name. But
yeah, and as far as varieties, got them listed down there. So, good share of the Extend Flex lineup on the Asgrow side are in good shape. Those are varieties rated a 4 or better. But like I mentioned, any variety like white mold can show up with the disease. It's just a matter of how much it's going to impact. And keep in mind, depending on your area, especially as you went into, Fort Dodge or Rockwell City, a lot of those areas, you were dealing with yellowed soybeans really for a month now. And, those didn't necessarily have anything to do with disease. Boy, I would even include BV County. There's just a lot of water sitting around, a lot of lack of oxygen for those soybeans. So it was hard to really see those beans take off just because of the saturated soils. And now a lot of those areas are having the SDS come in, but we're seeing reduction in growth for quite a while now on soybeans with record rains through July. And then on the soybean side, as far as aphids, boy, I don't know about you, but I guess from what I've seen and just talking to people, still fairly light on aphids. They're out there, but have not seen or heard of anything that's really blown up. A race to the finish with this as well. We are seeing some soybeans that are starting to get to R5, which for early August, that's moving along pretty well. And just as a reminder, that's where we've got the 1/8 inch seed, or basically we're forming seeds in the top 4 nodes. We always want to go by the top 4 nodes. So we're at that point where we're starting to see those seeds. But at that R5 stage, that essentially means we've got 2 weeks to get to that finish line as far as aphids hurting us. And really, I would apply that to most diseases as well, Dustin.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's been pretty light. I guess the area that I cover that I'm seeing the most counts is probably in that Terrell, Estherville, kind of down through Emmetsburg area, and some bean fields this week. And probably max, I was counting 40 to 50 on a plant, but I was kind of isolated as well. But other areas, it's pretty light.
So jumping over into corn and pollination, that's certainly been a hot topic. Certainly, there's been talk of tassel wrap, and is that affecting pollination? Some cases it has, some cases I would say it has not. But it's interesting that Corteva did address it and put out a bulletin.
Yeah, for sure. So I've walked several fields, and some are impacted more than others, but we pulled some talking points out of the Corteva crop bulletin on tassel wrap, and just highlighted a few of the key points. They're calling multiple genetics across multiple genetic families and brands and environmental factors as leading to this tassel wrap. They're leaning more towards this erect leaf architecture in the upper canopy and with the less branch tassels is causing that tassel to be wrapped up. Jim, we've been walking a lot of plots, a lot of fields. As I look through the DEKALB lineup, I cannot say we have seen anything in our lineup that is wrapped. Maybe there was a product or two that had some silks out a day or two before we really had some good pollen shed, but that was fine. There's some certain products that maybe hide their tassel a little more. It has that uprect leaf but it doesn't really wrap, but it might hide it more. But I have not seen this affect anything in our lineup per se. What's your thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, I haven't either myself. Yeah, there's always different tassel structures, and I always call it shedding in the boot. There's certainly hybrids that will start to release pollen before it's completely opened. But it does seem like, and they really pointed out here, it's some of the specific characteristics that they have been breeding for within certain lines, where just a smaller tassel, not many side branches, and then that negative anthesis, that's basically silking before the tassel, which that's not necessarily a problem, unless you really have a delay in the tassel or a very small tassel, then you can see those silks continue to grow. And to me, it's not a lack of pollen. There's plenty of pollen, and especially if you're in a plot situation, this some of the issues that seems to be showing up with the Corteva germplasm, you're not going to notice it in a plot situation, mainly because you've got a neighbor that's going to pollinate that. But I do see the issue where you've got that long silk growth, and you just have a hard time being able to pollinate everything when you get some of these 6-8 inch silks out there. especially if there's a lot of moisture. And that's kind of a separate issue, but that's been talked about as well this year, where we've had continuous moisture during pollination. That's not ideal for those silks either. They're just not as receptive when they can stay continuously wet. But if you're talking a 6-8 inch silk, plus it's wet, that's where you can start to see some of these scattered kernels and pollination issues.
Yeah.
How widespread is it? Probably not as widespread as what social media would lead you to believe, but we know it's out there. We know Corteva has addressed it because they've seen it within their germplasm, and it's something that they have selected for as far as that tassel architecture.
Yeah, and that's the fields that I've seen had issues are those single beam tassels. And I just happened to take a picture. So it's this is a seed corn production field by Algona, Pioneer Seed Production Field. Usually when you have seed production fields, you have one male and it's pollinating across 4 female lines, 4 female inbreds, and they do have some fields around that have just two females. So that tells me that they know that there's some genetics in the background that maybe has reduced tassel or reduced pollen shed from the males.
Yeah. So moving on, this time of the year, there's also people looking, which is great, at pollination and tip back. And, now is when we get calls about tip back, which is a completely different topic. And this is an example, took this yesterday, where, I would say this is a pretty normal year, but sometimes this will generate calls because it's like, okay, we've got ideal conditions and still I see a tip here. There's some of these that, either didn't pollinate or some that are kind of whitish that maybe will abort. But, depending on genetics, this is completely normal. You see it every year, no matter how good or how bad your conditions are. Certain genetics are just bred to have a tip showing. And of course, once you get another 3 weeks or especially a month down the road, that's going to shrink back. That cob is going to dry up and it's hardly noticeable. But this time of the year, we know that happens all the time where you see that tip and doesn't always look great, but it's more about, okay, what's our overall length and what's the kernel fill going to be from this point on. So completely different issue than kind of the Corteva tassel wrap thing, but wanted to bring that up as well.
Yeah, because in most of those fields, you're seeing, a corn ear will pollinate from the base to the tip. And at least the ones that I've been in that have experienced some problems with tassel wrap, we've missed some kernels at the base of the ear, not towards the tip.
All right, well, let's jump into diseases. Certainly been a hot topic, and hopefully you've been looking at some of the maps, the risk maps. That helps, but also it's still about what's going on in your own local area and in your own field. We continue to see tar spot risk ramp up. I will say, from what I've seen, yeah, it's out there, but I guess I haven't seen or heard of anything that's very widespread on tar spot. That'd be kind of your assessment too.
Yeah, I've been looking and you can find it, but sometimes you really have to look for it. That was the topic of discussion 2-3 weeks ago. We were really concerned with tar spot blowing up across the area. And yes, you can find it, but you really have to look for it. And it's in the lower part of the canopy if you do find it. I have definitely not found it above the ear.
Yeah, and that's the discussion too. A lot of these fields have had fungicides of 2 to 3 weeks. With all the moisture, you maybe not get the residual that you hope to get. I mean, 3 weeks is about the maximum you're going to get anyway. But some of these fields certainly are going to show diseases even that have been sprayed. Northern has been one of the more widespread diseases. Again, it's out there. Haven't seen any complete blow-ups or disasters, but officially most of the area in north central and northwest Iowa is in the high risk category, especially if we continue along some of the mild weather conditions, staying in the 70s or low 80s versus 90s. And then southern rust. Boy, obviously we had it last year. Will we ever see it again in our lifetime? Well, yeah, here we are the next year, and we're continuing to see it. So this is the last risk map, still in the moderate risk zone. I did pull the risk map from a year ago at this time, knowing, okay, what's our comparison? And this is a little scary because this was July 8th, or July 28th, a week earlier than right now. But we were in the low risk category for a good share of the northern 3 counties, at least roughly, of northwest Iowa. So fairly low as compared to the risk level as of right now. So that is concerning. We know it can still blow up. I was texting with a colleague who's in Missouri, northeast Missouri, and he said southern rust is blowing up down there. Obviously, that's an area that typically has southern rust, and they're a lot farther along. A lot of their corn is denting, so it's maybe not as big a concern, but questions on, do we spray again because we've got southern rust coming in. To me, it's about that, protecting that ear leaf. If we've got southern rust in the middle of the plant or in the lower canopy, not too big a deal. Getting on the late side to really be spraying fungicide again for some people for the second time. But if we've got corn that's only, say, R3 or milk stage, and we've got southern rust, ear leaf or above, I'd say that would be a candidate for spraying. Hopefully there's very few fields that fall into that category, because a lot of fields are at R4. If we're especially getting to R5 where we're starting to see a dent, then you feel like there just isn't really much benefit any sort of fungicide application at that time.
Yeah, pretty easy to find southern rust. It's kind of blown up a little bit, the last week, 10 days in that territory. Before, I was only seeing it in the lower canopy. Now this week, when it's out walking some fields, I am starting to see it get up to the ear leaf and above. So I don't know what the appetite will be for a second application. I know there will be some, but it's probably pretty minimal. But like Jim said, if it's still early milk stage and we still have some time to finish, and in some of these fields, we have really high yield potential. So I could see some growers maybe making a second application if they're trying to really hit a home run this year with the weather that they've received. So.
I'm sure. Yeah. And, we've talked about it, but the difference, mainly the color, just a little bit more of a reddish brown on the southern rust versus the common. That yellow halo, both of them will have a yellow halo, but the yellow halo tends to be a little more rounded on the southern rust. On the underside of the leaf, you can still see the yellow halo, but you won't see the pustules so much on southern, where on common, you can still see these pustules on that underside of the leaf. So that's the main differentiating. And most hybrids have a pretty solid tolerance to common rust, and it doesn't tend to blow up like southern. So southern is definitely the one to be on the watch for. I'll finish up with Spotlight product, one we're really excited about at the 107-day maturity, 107.69 as a Tricepta. Looks like this is going to have a broad fit, very stable product. In the breeding trials, it was one that was consistent in high yield environment as well as stress environments. Upright canopy, fairly tall plant. We see this, starting to replace a 108.17 product, which it is about, I believe, 7 inches shorter than 108.17. So still a fairly tall plant. But I really like the agronomics, especially stalks. This one is rated a 1 on stalks, which doesn't happen very often. So this thing is going to be one that will be able to have flexibility on harvest timing. Looks like a fairly low fusarium crown rot risk. And then Slim is the stalk lodging inducing machine. So really good late season standability and intactness. Good out of the ground this spring. So really looks like a solid product to go in a lot of different environments, both high and low yield environments. And then lastly, just here, actually 2 weeks ago today is when the EPA did open up the comment period on dicamba use in soybeans. So really we've got a good opportunity here to comment, and I'll have the QR code on the next slide. But this is the EPA's wording right now as far as on our actual label. This is not the final label, of course, by any means, but from the EPA's wording is there's no federal cutoff dates. Really, the applications, as far as the timing, based more on temperature. There are some requirements as far as vapor grip with volume used. Looks like to me it'd be nice to simplify this and just have 40 ounces of vapor grip extra agent across the board. But as far as applications, you can kind of see how that's laid out. And then no applications permitted when temperatures are above 95, which that seems to be common sense. One caveat is the application temperature limits. We're really looking at the forecast as well. So if we're expecting to get 95 degrees in the next 2 days via the forecast, then that really would be a no application situation. So I think this is good, and there's always some things to work around, but the opportunity to have both a pre and a post label for dicamba and soybeans looks really good for 2026.
Jim, we got a question in the chat from Joel about nitrogen deficiencies showing up with the amount of rainfall and expectations of nitrogen loss and how that could affect the crop and yield loss. I copied and pasted a nitrogen uptake curve. Post tassel, you still need to take up about 25% of your nitrogen. Now, some of that can be repartitioned in the plant as well. You can see some stalk cannibalization and moving that from the stalk into the ear, which obviously could cause some lodging issues later on. So there is a concern for nitrogen loss. We've had a lot of rain. We've moved that down deeper into the soil profile. Along with that, with the rain though, too, we've had rain. We've had warmer temperatures. We have really high organic matter soils. We're probably getting some mineralization as well. So walking fields, I have been in some that are green top to bottom, but others with not as great a nitrogen program are starting to fire. I haven't seen anything firing up above the ear leaf yet, but I guess I would be pretty concerned if you're within a leaf or two of the ear leaf today. I guess your thoughts, Jim?
No, I agree. And good point, Joel. Yeah, we've had good color all season. I think we've had very good mineralization as far as organic matter releasing nitrogen. But yeah, as we continue to get the rains, the record rains, that becomes a factor. And yeah, to me, it is going to be localized. There's going to be spots, depending on how good your tile drainage is. But just having some of these roots sit in saturated areas, not only for nitrogen loss, but also the potential for crown rot, which kind of really goes hand in hand with the nitrogen deficiency. So I am concerned about that part of it. The cannibalization, like you mentioned, Dustin, I think is going to be a factor. We were very nervous about that last year because we had all kinds of nitrogen deficiency. We ended up a real nice dry fall, so it was kind of minimized, but yeah, the potential is there for the cannibalization to be a big factor this fall.
Yeah, for sure. When you start doing some kernel counts out there in some areas, there's some pretty high potential, and depending on amount of pounds of nutrients we have out there, we definitely see some issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's good and bad. We've got a nice big area there to fill, but it's going to be hungry. It's going to have requirements.
For sure.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up, Joel. So yeah, just QR code as far as on the comments, because we know there's a lot of people that are anti-ag, and I don't know if they want to eat or not, but they seem to be able to complain about everything, and they complain about people producing the food. So they're going to fight technologies that we have. So I guess us in ag need to try to get our voice out there and make sure we're heard. But that is where we wanted to wrap up. We got the QR code here for the CCA half credit in crop management. But I know we went a little bit over time, but a lot of things to talk about this time of the year, right?
Yep.
As you're looking at the QR code and getting that, certainly available for questions or comments, otherwise that you're seeing out there.
I appreciate everybody taking the time to attend this morning.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have yourself a good day, and hopefully we'll dry things out.